Hello again, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the OIS Podcast. I'm your host, Sophia Pathai, MD, PhD. Now, today, we're going to be discussing India, biotech, and venture capital. Three topics very close to my heart, and I'm delighted we have two guests with us today to help us dive through these topics. So with me today, I have Dr. Ramesh Byrapaneni and Dr. Jogin Desai. Welcome to you both.
Thanks, Sophia. It's our pleasure too.
It's great to have you both. Thank you. I'm just going to set the scene about both your respective companies, and then I'm going to ask you both to maybe dive into your personal careers. And yeah, let's have a great conversation about the flourishing biotech scene in India and a lot of other great topics to discuss.
Sure.
So Eyestem is a cell therapy company founded by clinical trial, cell therapy, and ophthalmology experts. Their long-standing vision is to create a scalable cell therapy platform to treat incurable diseases and democratize access to these newer technologies for the bottom 99% of the population globally. Endiya Partners is a VC firm based out of India that backs product startups that are solving local and global problems. Their company invests across software, deep tech, financial services, and healthcare sectors. And the team comprises experts in the health, medical, IT, and finance services. So as you can see, we have quite an illustrious panel with us today who are going to bring us some great insights. So I think what we'll do is start off with Dr. Ramesh. We'd love to know more about your career arc and your journey to become an MD of Endiya Partners. And then after that, maybe we can get Jogin to chime in as the CEO of Eyestem.
Sure. Sophia, I basically started off as a doctor like any one of you, and I did my cardiology from PGI Chandigarh and went to US, did my interventional cardiology fellowship, and came back and started one of the earliest private hospitals in the country almost 30 years back, 1988, 35 years back. So I was practicing as a doctor, as a cardiologist, as running the hospital. Those days, private healthcare is almost non-existent in the country. We're one of the first 10 hospitals. But after 25 years of practice, something led to the other and suddenly decided to switch careers. And probably the ignition or stimulus maybe I was heading a non-profit organization while I'm practicing as a cardiologist called TIE, the Indus Entrepreneurs, is a global organization supporting the entrepreneurship, education, networking, and mentorship. So most of the audience come to us and ask us, it's okay, you're teaching us, you're educating us, you're mentoring us, but networking is okay, but where is the money? And that led me and my partner, the present partner, Satish Andhra, to start the Hyderabad Angels Group as a founding director. This again, 2012, almost 10 years back, when the angel investments are completely new in the country. And after a couple of years, then I decided to quit practice and started the fund and became the MD along with Satish Andhra. And that's how my transition from a cardiologist, practicing cardiologist to a venture capitalist. Probably this may not be quite unusual in countries like US or your country, but in a country like India, it's totally unheard of. And prior to that, I did a few angel investments as a doctor. One of them was Nephroplus, India's largest dialysis service provider. And I think I'll stop here and then listen to Jogin's story before we get on to the other questions, Sophia.
No, thank you so much for sharing your career arc. And I think you're right. You've been a pioneer, I think, for physicians going into venture capital in India. And we know a few podcasts back, we discussed with some European venture capitalists their careers, and all of them agreed as well. They've had these kind of non-linear pathways into venture capital. So I think, again, you're a wonderful example of that. And then without further ado, we should hear from Jogin. So Jogin, you're the CEO, but I know you've done a lot of other things before your leadership at Eyestem. So please tell us more.
Okay, thank you, Sophia. So I did my medicine here in India, just like Dr. Ramesh, and then went to the US. I then worked in several pharmaceutical companies and got into clinical trials and drug discovery. Returned to India I was part of the team that set up Quintiles in India. I ran their global cardiac safety operations. And in 2007, I went back to the US. I was the CEO of a randomization company known as Senduit, which was a joint venture between Quintiles and Thermo Fisher. And so I ran that for about 8 years. And then that's, I think about 2016, 17 is when I said, okay, you know what, enough is enough. Let's find something interesting to do. And that's when the story of Eyestem begins. So it's been an absolute pleasure so far.
So fabulous. And again, another non-linear career with lots of leaps as well. So it's just thrilling to hear that kind of journey.
The Ophthalmology Innovation Summit is back in a big way with OIS 12 being held at the Hard Rock Hotel in San Diego on December 2nd and 3rd. Get ready for a rocking time networking and having fun while expanding your knowledge and making new connections. For more information on presenting or attending, visit OIS.net today.
Journey. So, you touched upon Eyestem, and even I did it in the introduction. But let's hear a little bit more about the inception of the company. Tell us more about the founders and the reason why you set up the company.
Sure. So it's a great question. What we did in 2016, I actually met Dr. Rajani Battu, who is our chief medical officer. And we were talking about a completely unrelated ophthalmology consult. And we started talking about, these cell and gene therapies and how they're going to be priced exorbitantly and out of the reach for what I call the bottom 99% of the population, because only the top 1% could afford them. Because if you look at these, even today, they are costing $300,000, $400,000 and above, which makes no sense for anybody, I would argue, beyond a certain small fleet. So that's when we thought this is a fantastic space to be in, where you can actually do a lot of good, as well as create a business case that is very strong. And that's when Eyestem was formed. Our vision is to democratize access to cell therapy. And the mission is to create a scalable cell therapy platform where we would want our products to be not just 20% less, but 1/10 of what somebody else does, because at that point only can you make a difference. So we're making good progress towards that. Let's see.
And I'm sure we'll go into the topic of access later on, because it's something I'm passionate about as well. But just deep dive into the platform. So I know you've got some indications in ophthalmology, but also a bit outside of the eye as well, perhaps. So I would love to hear more about what you're intending to do in the ophthalmology field, but also what stage you're at the moment.
Sure. Okay. So our lead product is a suspension of retinal pigment epithelium cells. We're fairly near submitting to the Indian regulatory authorities for first in human trials. We're waiting for some last bits and pieces of some animal studies that are going to come in the next 3-4 months. And then we're off to the races, as they say, for a first in human trial for RPE for geographic atrophy. We believe it is a little bit different from all the others for a whole host of scientific reasons. And we've published a lot of that, in papers. And so that's our lead product. Just for context, in India, dry AMD, there are about 1.5 crores, so about 15 million people who have this kind of disease. So that's a massive problem in India. And the other indication is for retinitis pigmentosa, where we are growing photoreceptors. We started with the concept of scale from day one. So we have a unified protocol that creates both RPE as well as photoreceptors, and that increases the economies of scale. And again, for India, 1.5 million kids suffer from RP. So even the rare diseases are not rare, unfortunately. So these are the two of our main products. We anticipate our photoreceptor product to go into trials 12 to 18 months after the RPE one. While that's going on, we've expanded onto alveolar cells for idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. So that's in the research and development phase, where we're figuring out how to scale this, because the level of scale and the level of the amount of dose, etc., that you would need for a lung is very different from what you need in the eye. So all that is going on. So these are the three things that are on our radar while we go along.
Wonderful. And thanks for sharing. And of course, we want to think more about the ophthalmology perspective, but very nice to hear that you've got the kind of extraocular platform as well. But just going back to, the RPE and the photoreceptors, it's wonderful that you have this technology. But let's face it, at the moment, everything I see in social media feeds or in the ophthalmology conferences and trade shows, the retina space is getting very crowded, and cell therapy is also becoming increasingly a crowded space, which I think is great. It shows the level of innovation happening. So how do you see Eyestem fitting into the sort of overall platform of cell therapies, and what's the value proposition that you're bringing?
Yeah. So the value proposition comes in two ways. One is the product maturity. The way we have created the product is what I would like to call the Goldilocks product, where it's not too mature and not too immature. So it doesn't create any safety issues, but at the same time, it is not so mature that its efficacy is hit. So that's the secret sauce, if you will, of Eyestem, how to create the product at the right fit. And we've got some fantastic animal studies which back that claim up. And so that we believe will create a differentiator as we move into first in human trials, because we will see safety as well as efficacy in those things. And the other way to differentiate is that, first of all, quality is a given in this field, right? I mean, you can't mess around with that. We're working with the FDA. We had a pre-IND with the FDA, but at the same time, the ability to create scale which can help provide this therapy to a larger patient population that needs it is our true differentiator. If we end up creating another $200,000 therapy, I don't think it's worth it. So we need to really focus on that, and we are really focused on that.
Nicely said. Thanks, Jogin. And it looks like that value proposition that you've articulated is capturing the attention of investors as well. And I know congratulations are in order because you recently announced financing. So yes. I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
Sure. Thank you. So first of all, Dr. Ramesh is here. He's been a very, very strong supporter of Eyestem, and we started off this fundraising round about 6 months ago. And one thing led to another. The beauty of this round is, of course, the two of the most reputable venture investors in the country, Endiya Partners as well as Kotak, have participated in this round. But we've got 3 pharma companies who are very interested in innovation, who joined us. Biologically, Natco as well as Alchem, all 3 are multi-billion-dollar companies now, and they all were very interested in the platform that we are creating. And it's very heartening to see, because that having 3 of these plus the promoters of Chemwell, which is one of the best CDMOs in the country, is a completely total scientific validation of what we do now. We don't really need anybody else. There's nobody better to judge our science than these companies who do this day in and day out. So we're very excited about this round.
Well, I'm excited for you too. And it's a great way to bring Dr. Ramesh back into the conversation. So Ramesh, we know that you have financed the Eyestem platform, but you've also had some other great investments. So maybe talk to us a bit about the reason why you wanted to invest in Eyestem, and then maybe talk us through your personal investment thesis, because I think you're the only medic on your team of venture capitalist investors. So what helps you to decide when you want to make an investment? So I'd love to know a bit about Eyestem, a bit about your investment thesis, and overall Endiya Partners and what you're looking to do in the venture space.
Sure. Endiya Partners, early stage VC fund. We write the first institutional check in most of the cases, and we are more a seed investor, seed and a pre-series A investor. We write anywhere from $500K to a couple of $1 million the first check, and over the life of the company, probably will write $3 to $5 million checks. But the subsequent rounds, we don't normally lead. We always, after we write the first check, we expect the founders to go and show some decent traction and raise from outside investors. And when they do it, we support them. But probably in a rare situation, sometimes we may have to, in a difficult environment, sometimes we may have to protect them. But in the usual circumstances, that's the route. Having said that, we do both in tech investments, tech and healthcare investments, and I do the healthcare investments. When we say healthcare, it's predominantly digital health, a little bit medical devices, a little bit on the life sciences. Before I dig further into the healthcare, on the other tech investments, when we started the fund in 2015, very few early stage investors are talking about product startups, SaaS platforms, or fintech, but now it became very common actually. In fact, we invested in a company developing a 4D imaging radar chip for autonomous vehicles. We invested in a company developing a chip for artificial intelligence. Right. And surprisingly, none of the, for getting the follow-on investors, we had a lot of trouble. Very few investors in this country want to write checks for deep tech companies. The same thing with Eyestem. I'll come to that a little later. And anyhow, coming from the background where we are, myself, Satish comes from my partner comes from a semiconductor background. with his contacts, he's able to support a couple of small rounds from overseas investors. And right now, as we are speaking, I know it's confidential, but I won't tell the names. We may have some good news in the next 1 month for both these companies. So we are more a very deep tech, very product-focused startup VC fund. We almost call ourselves a co-founder VCs. At the end of the day, at my age, and my partner is slightly younger to me, more than the money, I think the satisfaction that comes of supporting a company which makes a mark in the international arena is what drives us actually. When Jogin says, I don't want my product, even if it's successful, which it will be, at 200,000 K, and he wants to sell at $1,000, I'm not the one who will definitely, I will never say no to that. Because at the end of the day, even if Eyestem doesn't become a unicorn charging that much, but if it can impact thousands of patients, that gives us the real satisfaction, as much as it gives satisfaction to Jogin. So when I said we are predominantly digital health, very little medical devices, very little life sciences, the reason is very few companies from India on the medical devices front and life sciences side have taken companies globally. You may ask me the same thing on the digital health also, but digital health, at least in India, there's a large market. Whereas in medical devices, with all the complexity, or your life sciences companies, like drug discovery, small molecules, biosimilars, or cell therapy companies, after going through all that pain of 7 years, 10 years, going through regulatory pathways, clinical trials, the entire world has to be a market. You can't just say I will sell in India. So that's the reason we predominant, and also the market is, when I say market, the investment ecosystem is not still ready to support real deep tech medical companies and life sciences companies. So all our investments are predominantly the digital health. For example, we have a company called Care, a health benefits platform. We have a company called CureFit into wellness side. And we have a company called SugarFit in chronic disease management virtually. We have a company in oncology space, chronic disease again, a tech-enabled navigator, navigating the patient, decoupling the knowledge from the actual delivery of healthcare. Whether you're in a tier 1 city with good connections to doctors or tier 3 city with no connections to any doctor, can he get the same treatment? And we have a company in pathology, AI in pathology, called Sick-Triple. In fact, we applied for FDA. Hopefully, we'll get it the next 3 months is our guess. And in fact, one of the largest cell counters company in the world, a Japanese French company called Horiba, signed a partnership to distribute that. Probably the first time a global MNC is partnering with the Indian startup for distribution. And I think these are the bets are predominantly into the digital health. And we take a very top-down approach plus a bottoms-up approach. When we mean, what I mean was, we not just look at the proposals which come to us. In fact, I was actively looking for a cell therapy company for the last 7 years. Similarly, I'm looking for a gene therapy company, someone in gene therapy, or even a CAR T therapy, or a biosimilars, a vaccine company. And I think, so we basically scout for, in fact, when I looked for a CAR T therapy, I found a startup in IIT Mumbai. It's very good work they have done. But again, the professor who is a founder, is not even the founder technically, is a great guy, good results, good initial results. But at that time when I saw the company was not even formed. He's not willing to come out of his academics. So we actually look for deals, and that's how I found Jogin. And obviously, I'm quite impressed by his team. And when I spoke to the advisory board who come from NIH, University of California, and the pathology professor from Oregon State Health University, I'm quite convinced the opportunity is huge. Obviously, there's competition from US and Japan, maybe Europe. But when I invested in this company a year back, the quality of the rigor of their protocols, the processes, the attention to details, quite impressed. If there's someone in this country who will succeed, I thought this team of Jogin and Dr. Rajani and Rajeshri are the right people to back up. I know it's a long answer, but I'm sure I've conveyed our thesis and why we invested in Eyestem.
very comprehensive and really gave us a flavor of not only your investment thesis, but also the principles underlying that. And I think what really resonated with me was when you mentioned, you want to see the success of Eyestem, even if it's not going to be a unicorn because of the population it will be serving. I mean, it may well be, of course, but let's get your perspectives both on this, because I think that's very honorable, that we want to think of this almost in an impact way, right? We want to maximize the opportunity and making sure we can follow up on democratization of access, which everyone seems to talk about. And that's what I want to ask you about. I see a lot of people talking on panels or at conferences or in social media about the need to democratize access. So do you think that can truly happen? And what do you think are the potential barriers? And where do you see opportunities? And maybe you want to take it from an India perspective and then also a global perspective. So Jogin, why don't you give us your thoughts from, being enmeshed right now in that kind of process? And then maybe Dr. Ramesh, give us some high level overview perspective from an investor side.
Sure. Thanks, Sophia. So the first thing about scale is that it has to be built into your vision and your purpose. What do you want to do? It's and that purpose has to flow through every decision that you make. So one of the things, for example, that we, when we started in 2017, 16, 17, one of the things that people said is you could make a sheet of the RPE versus a suspension. And we chose a suspension. There were some fairly good results that were coming out. Even right now, they are coming out. But one of the other reasons why we chose the suspension is because the sheet is just not scalable. So we said, if that's the only way to go, we're not going there, right? So, and there were a lot of other decisions that we made along the way where purpose was built into the decision-making process. So it has to be front and center of your operational execution strategy. We, for example, created a unified protocol. The unified protocol can create both products at the same time. It reduces the error rates, it increases the dependability of the protocols, and you get two for the price of one. So all of a sudden your scale increases. We're also looking at artificial intelligence. We're looking at automation and how to create a protocol which is less and less and less dependent on the human being and create simple versions of the protocol which can produce the same quality. So to answer your first question, democratizing access is, if you want to go beyond the slogan, it is a tough line to walk, but it can be done as long as you're actually purposefully, methodically going through that process. And I think, if we do that, I'll come back to this thing about unicorns and impact. I don't think they are exclusive. I think if we can figure out how to service a huge section of humanity, then value will automatically be unlocked. So we're not too worried. I think we're on a very, very good path. And we just don't want to be the unicorn which doesn't serve patients. But if we do end up serving patients, a large number of patients who end up benefiting, then we almost certainly deserve to be a unicorn and will be one. So it's you approach it from the impact way, but that does not necessarily dilute the value. Impact is the way towards the value.
Great philosophy. Thanks for sharing that. And Dr. Ramesh, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I think, Sophia, as on today, it's probably a statement we are making that we want to provide democratized therapy and we want to make sure lots of people will benefit. But the real test will come when the product is approved and comes into the clinical use. Definitely in India, probably the affordability is less, definitely will charge more. But what happens tomorrow? A US company wants to distribute their product. They will say, we'll give you $1,000 per dose. Sorry, $100,000 per dose, but I will charge $500,000 per dose. But I'm sure the test of the metal will come at that time, whether Jogin's ability to say, no, even if you want to sell at a higher price, I want to get lower cost, or even for that matter, investors, whether we'll become greedy and say, no, Jogin, why don't we do that? In India, fine, we are from India, let's give it at a lower price. But in the outside country, when some other large MNC is willing to market your product at a higher cost, that I think the real challenge will only come, while I may say whatever I may say now, 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line. But basically our philosophy is make sure as many people benefit as possible. That's a goal, at least from me as an investor, and Jogin and the rest of the team. They're very committed to this space.
Yeah, wonderful, but in a realistic perspective as well. And, in that answer, you also referenced the global markets and the local markets. So maybe, Jogin, if I can go back to you, you had this very successful fundraise, and you mentioned for investors who basically come from an Indian base, right, across VCs and from big MNCs or pharmaceuticals.
Yes.
So was that quite intentional to go to the Indian investor base, or did you want to go more globally, and were there barriers? Would love to know, because we think we're in this super connected world where everyone can reach out to each other, and there should be, transfer of knowledge and of investments. But it does seem to me there is some localization of investments in the US, in Europe, and now it seems like India. So would love to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, so at a perspective level, we've always been global, right? Our pre-IND with the FDA was just before COVID started. So we've been always global. Even in my previous roles as in Quintiles and Sendivit, we've always been global, working with global regulatory agencies. So the outlook remains the same, whether it is global or local. The documentation, there is no Indian product and a global product, it's the same product. So that's number one. Number two is we do not talk to investors based on whether local or global. For me, the more important thing is, can I align my philosophy with that investor? And if that aligns, then everything, whether they are local or global, doesn't really matter. It so happened that we could align with people here, and it all of a sudden, our round was full, we couldn't accept any more money. But other than that, there was no other. I mean, we don't have any aversion to global money. The only thing is, we're saying it has to align with what we're trying to do. Our clinical trial, once we finish, once we get the first early signs of success in India, we are looking to expand to Australia. So our footprint and all of that, our vision, our outlooks, our perspectives are always global. But certainly with a core competence of having known the Indian markets and all of that, there's no getting away from that.
And it's wonderful that you have that perspective. And I know that there are many upcoming value inflection points for you. So just remind us and the audience of what we can hope to see in the next few months, or maybe out to the end of the year, because of course it's conference season as well.
Yes.
For ophthalmology. So just give us a flavor of what we can expect to see from Eyestem.
Sure. So in the next few months, we're hoping we'll get the last of our animal data in. There are some toxicity data and all of that. We are very hopeful that this is all turned out to be the right one. And once that happens, we will be looking to file a dossier with the Indian regulatory authorities. We already have a protocol that's lined up, that has been screened and submitted to the FDA. And we have in LV Prasad Eye Hospital, which is India's best hospital for ophthalmology, who will be conducting the trial. So the next 12 months is going to be very, very exciting for us at Eyestem, and a lot of fingers are going to be crossed over the next 12 months.
I'm keeping my fingers crossed too, and I'm glad you could make time for us today. I know you've been incredibly busy with all the latest developments and the fundraising, so thanks for sharing the time.
No. Thank you for having me.
On the fundraising, can I make a few comments?
Please. Yeah,
sure.
I would love to.
So when this discussion came up that Eyestem wanted to raise $7 to $8 million, obviously because of paucity of time, probably Jogin didn't want to. We didn't want to go to the overseas investors at this stage, actually. The reason is, it's an Indian company, that not just Eyestem, but no one else from India has done this kind of work before.
Yes.
And real landmarks like the clinical trials haven't yet started. And most of the VCs usually invest locally. US investors will be comfortable with the US, while I do agree, like you, globalization happening at the investment level. But I thought to myself and told Jogin, maybe we should look at India investors only for this round. And maybe, as you rightly said, when the real inflection point happens, when we find all the animal trials are through and we are ready to go for human data, or even for that matter, the present money is, for the human data trials, maybe once we get maybe 10 patients or 50 patients data out, and that may be the time when the global investors may want to look at the data, because that data is far more concrete at that stage. And coming to the next question, why did we do strategic investments, took money from strategics rather than financial investors? Fortunately or unfortunately, I would say unfortunately, none of the early stage investors in India are willing to do a life sciences investment. Post-COVID, if you talk to maybe 100 early stage investors, everyone wants to do healthcare investments. But the meaning of healthcare investments means predominantly digital health platforms, delivering consultations, delivering medicines or home tests. But when it comes to some kind of a serious medical device or a life sciences company, unfortunately, none from the Indian investment community are willing to write checks. In fact, we approached two of them actually. And among the Indian investors who can really understand healthcare, but in one call, we realized their ability to take a decision. All said and done, these investments are tricky. These investments are tough. It can be all or none phenomenon. With all our good faith, all the animal experiments are good so far. In the next 3 months, we'll get the results of the balance test. But any one of them can go wrong. And probably we need to repeat the study, maybe one more year or maybe 2 more years. That risk is always there. So very few people have the domain expertise or the understanding that these animal trials is not sequential, small animals, large animals, human data, at any stage there can be. So then me and Jogin brainstormed and then said, Dr. Ramesh, why don't we talk to friends in the pharma industry? Can you believe we approached only 3 investors in Hyderabad and 2 of them wrote checks, Natco, Biologically. Only one of them said he liked the product. He liked Jogin's team, but he said the valuation and the percentage stake he will get is not enough. That's the reason he said, I need more ownership.
Right.
And I think if I'm not mistaken, Jogin only approached 3 other people.
Yeah.
So out of the 6 people, 4 people wrote the checks. And that's gratifying.
Very impressive.
Yes, only 6 presentations, one visit of Jogin to Hyderabad, one visit to Mumbai. Why I brought up this subject is in the Indian ecosystem, okay, VCs may not be evolved yet, but in the pharma families who have first generation families, second generation, people are really open to take decisions like this. That's the reason I want to bring this subject. So startups, especially in the life sciences, need not think there's no investment, there's no money available in this country. And many pharma companies, founders, CEOs are open to make risky bets like this, provided they like the product, provided they like the team and the capabilities of team to make it happen.
That was a great answer, because actually I was going to ask you that very question about, investing in the Indian for VCs and for entrepreneurs in India and the global perspective on that. So thank you for sharing that. I think a lot of the audience will be wondering about the Indian ecosystem, who they can approach and what the risk appetite is like. So thanks for sharing that. And just as a very practical tip, are you open to receiving pitches from entrepreneurs in the space globally that Endiya Partners might want to review? And if you are, what's the best way of getting in touch with you, Dr. Ramesh?
Sure. We don't mind looking at wherever the teams are located, but sometimes the question comes, are we relevant? For example, okay, these days, post-COVID, everything became Zoom, everyone is comfortable, but still sometimes it always appears, whether someone from London, someone from Israel, someone from San Francisco, there's so much available in those parts of the world, but are we relevant? But otherwise, we're open to looking at startups from anywhere in the world. In fact, going forwards, the Fund 3, we wanted to make sure our presence is global, in the sense that we maybe 1 or 2 partners may be from different parts of the world. I think that's absolutely. Otherwise, sitting here thinking that I'll support someone from London or someone from San Francisco may not be, except writing the checks, may not be useful. That's the reason in the next fund we want to enlarge our team so that people are on the ground to support the startups. One more suggestion for would-be entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs reaching out to venture capitalists, while cold calls are important, they can directly email. It's always better if someone knows them personally and they put in a introductory call. That will be so valuable, actually. In fact, Jogin, actually, I didn't tell you. I asked Tasil Marif from CCMB, please recommend one startup in your entire, probably, I don't know whether I should be official. He said, please recommend someone I want to meet, whom you like the best. And then he said, you should meet Jogin. So that, I think, obviously not that I made my decision because of that. Definitely that made me be attentive to what Jogin is doing. And when Jogin said, these are my 3 advisory board members, many times you see on the startups pictures, you see 3 or 4 board members who doesn't know much, they're not involved actually. Whereas when I spoke to Mahendra Rao from NIH or who's the other person from NIH?
Kapil Bharti.
Yes, Kapil. And then I spoke to the professor from Oregon Health State University. I got a real feeling that what these people have done is cutting edge technology. So that references are so crucial actually in the venture capital world. It's a very closed end space. Everyone knows each other. And instead of directly approaching, if someone whom they have seen their work, if they can put in a word, I'm sure that really brings in the appropriate attentiveness from any VC in the world.
That's a really different, if I may say, perspective, because I think the podcast that was just episode 336, if I'm not mistaken, the venture capital panel in Europe, some of our venture capitalists from Europe said that they don't mind cold emails and they don't mind having just the complete cold outreach. So I think it's what I've learned from that. It's a blended approach, right? And every venture capitalist is different, but it's always great to know how they can best get that introduction and how.
Why I said that, Sophia, is while we definitely look at cold emails, whichever email comes from anyone, and if it has a deck, we'll definitely spend. But sometimes in the deck, you'll not be able to communicate.
Yes.
Whereas the real work, what you're doing may not be possible. Your passion may not come out very clearly in the presentation. And so that probably a referral from someone else will validate that thought process actually. Otherwise, some decks are fabulous, you can make out, but some decks may not be great, but they may be doing great work. So if someone doesn't want to miss that opportunity, using that combination approach may be good.
It just highlights the value of personal connections and building out your network. And Jogin, it was so relevant when you mentioned earlier how you got to meet Dr. Rajni just through a completely different topic, but actually that's how you got to meet her. And so maybe just some final words from you, Jogin. You're a CEO at an early stage company. Any words maybe of inspiration for those who are about to embark on the journey or who are just getting started? Anything you want to share with a lot of the entrepreneurs who listen to this show?
Well, I mean, it's been an amazing journey for me. I've handled 2 global, business units before this, 1 global company before this, but this has been a journey of its own. Once you find your purpose, and you're passionate about it, I don't think anything else matters. Then work isn't really work. It's just, fun. So I would highly encourage entrepreneurs to look at the impact that they want to create. Versus the money that they want to earn, because that's the latter is transitory, while the former is the one that will keep you going and going and going. Especially because, as any entrepreneur knows, there will be dips, right? You will get into a point where things are not working as well as you expect, and you need the energy at that time to keep going. And at that time, only purpose can save you, not your sort of intent to have some money or whatever. So I would say find that and everything else will follow.
Wonderful. So find your impact, connections, and purpose. So today's show was all about India, biotech, venture capital, and so much more. So Dr. Jogin Desai and Dr. Ramesh Byrapaneni, thank you so much for joining us today on the OIS podcast, and I wish you both all the best in your future endeavors. Bye for now.
Thank you, Sophia.
It's our pleasure too. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for listening to the OIS Podcast. Tune in next week as we chat science, medicine, and industry with ophthalmology's leading experts. Visit OIS.net for more information on podcasts, events, and exciting new features.